Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 150 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Building on his success as the founder of HeyU, a consumer ordering and payments app, Adam Theobald continues to forge hospitality industry change with Ordermentum, a B2B ordering platform for the food and beverage sector. Driven by a passion for technology and its ability to create a more seamless and efficient experience, Ordermentum is bringing new ways of working to supplier, retail, and technology companies and has become the chosen platform by more than 28,000 hospitality venues and hundreds of wholesale suppliers around Australia. Folks, so that we can keep running the show, Access Collins has sponsored this episode. Their revolutionary booking and inquiry management software for hospitality is designed to help operators increase foot traffic, maximize revenue, and tackle no-shows. And they're doing that. The average user on their platform sees 18% more web bookings, an increase of 25% on inquiry conversion rates, and up to 900 hours saved in admin each year through automation. If that might help you too, check them out at bit.ly/hosposponsor. Hello and welcome to the show, Adam.
James, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program today. I'm very excited to hear all about your business, about Ordermentum and the businesses that you've built before and how it came to be and a bit about your story. And we've had a little chat on the phone before doing this interview today, and you've got a really exciting story. So without further ado, I'll open it up with the first question that I have on the program, a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. So I'd love to know what you've brought to the program today.
It's actually funny. I've been lucky to be born into a foodie family. My parents love their food, love their restaurants. And I was actually apparently brought home from the hospital via a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, exactly. So it's kind of been in my blood from day one. But look, over the years, it's changed. I've been lucky to go to lots of nice restaurants with my wife, and certainly pre-kids, that was a big focus for us. More recently, though, in kids, it's turned into great pub meals, and I'm lucky enough to live in Balmain in Sydney where there's no shortage of those. More recently, even still with COVID, I'm trying to support all the restaurants I can by ordering the delivery at home. And I think that's a really cool experience and something everyone should try. Flying Fish's seafood basket's getting a good workout for me at the moment. But the experience that I actually come back to, James, is just that morning coffee. For me, I set my days up around an hour or two in my local cafe where I prepare for the day. And I don't know if it's the context of COVID or not, but I really yearn for that moment every morning where without ordering, they come up and put my 3/4 flat white on the table. It's just such a spiritual, almost religious moment that we all get to enjoy, is that beautiful specialty coffee every morning and a moment of solitude. And if I'm honest, that's the hospitality experience that I most yearn at the moment.
Well, thank you for touching on a couple of different experiences there. And as you mentioned, you came home from the hospital via a Chinese restaurant there. So it's in your blood, and your family obviously took you to many places growing up. Do you have an experience in particular, anything that jumps out, or that regular morning ritual? It is a beautiful and, as you mentioned, spiritual experience. Is there anything in particular that resonates over time that maybe that has even inspired you to do what you do?
Yeah, look, actually, going back a few years now, we're at a concert, my co-founder of HeyU and I, Scott Player. I actually was queuing up for 45 minutes to get the chicken burgers that everyone was craving. And being the most hungry of the bunch, I did go first and wait in the queue. And after I'd been waiting 40 minutes, missing out on the show, I really started to get frustrated. And this group of people kind of emerged in front of me and pushed in. And Scott got really upset with this. And I went into negotiation mode and I said, look, girls, we've been standing here for a long time. What about you let me go in front and we'll stop complaining. We can all go on our way. And they had a little huddle and they allowed us to go in front of them. And when I got in front of them, I actually ordered 20 chicken burgers rather than the 5 chicken burgers that I was meant to. And the guy who I was ordering from, he looked at me as if I was crazy initially, but then he kind of looked at me and said, oh, right on. And you could see him have this moment of realization that with one customer, and one payment, he got to sell more of his awesome chicken burgers. And so there's this really interesting moment of forming some of the fundamental problems that Hey You continues to solve around impatience and helping operators sell more and helping consumers not be frustrated and having to wait and so forth. And so, look, that moment was really a light bulb moment for me with the Hey You story. Scott and I went on to found Beat the Queue that became Hey You, and I suppose apply that same problem to the wider context of that regular coffee purchase.
Now, I definitely want to open that up, and it's very easy for me to segue into what I normally do about why you do what you do, and that's an excellent story there for that. But I just want to ask about those chicken burgers. Did you give all of those chicken burgers to the girls, or were those 20 chicken burgers for you guys?
I was super hungry and I was tempted to eat them all myself. But what we actually did was we actually walked around the group of girls that pushed in and we sold them to all the people in the queue that were waiting. And it was quite funny because I remember these people looking at you as if to say, "Are you crazy? Are you selling me chicken burgers?" But as soon as they had a moment of consciousness, they realized that they were saving time. They jumped at it. I'm not going to admit to it being a successful commercial enterprise, but it was certainly one that showed us what customer experience was about.
Yeah, interesting. I'm glad I asked a little bit more about it. Thank you for the story as well, Adam. So then through this story and hearing a little bit about, or a very small amount about your background growing up and your experience with food through your family, what is it that gets you up in the morning and inspires you, and what you're thinking before you have that coffee and then during and after?
It's something about most uni students, but when I went to uni, I really got caught up in the coffee culture. I really started to experiment with new coffees, going to new places, and I really enjoyed that as a place. And I think the things that really resonated with me was just how customer focused and just how product focused that industry is. You've got operators who could be doing all sorts of amazing jobs, but they're really passionate about their product and their customers. And I really got caught up in that. And I developed some great relationships over the years through frequenting too many cafes. The first ever Hey You cafe was actually the Little Marionette in Balmain on Gladstone Park. And, I became good friends with Ed and Andy there. The same goes at Centro Cafe in Eastwood, Murat and Danny. And they really helped me get ingrained in the culture. And I think as I started to go through uni, it really dwelled on me, this beautiful marriage of customer experience, but also real business problems. I studied computer science, so I was a bit of a geek. I naturally was playing with different concepts and different products. And at one point, I built a Wi-Fi hotspot system for cafes. I remember that as my first little business. But the reality is that I was obsessed with finding ways to scale and to make better this brilliant focus on product and customer. And I think Hey You was a natural step in that direction.
I was thinking we can't use hotspot much these days. Some people will turn heads quite quickly, but it sounds like you had some interesting experiences even building some tech while you were studying. Resonates your story there with me because I've got quite a similar story myself. So it's interesting to hear then going into those venues and thinking about it commercially. For me, it was more of a philosophical experience and thinking about all the senses being engaged. It's the only art form that really does that. But thank you for sharing why and what it is that really inspires you. So tell us a bit about Ordermentum and what it is that you're doing now and maybe how you've come to do what you do, just before we catch up on what it is.
In rolling out Hey You to many venues around the country, one of the constant bits of feedback that I used to get from the cafe owners or the restaurant owners was, "This is great. I'm really thankful that my customers can order and they can avoid the queue and so forth. But what about me? I'm a small business owner in Australia. It feels like I'm left out in terms of technology tools that can really help me run my business, but not just run my business, but like create space to create fantastic product for my customers." And time again, they kept itching on me this feedback that they're being left out and it's unfair. We need to do something for them. And so I started playing with how Hey You could be pivoted to use an ordering experience between the venue and their suppliers. Because you've got to remember, they've got 10 suppliers. Typically, they have to order 10 different ways. They've got a receipt through a drawer full of invoices that are all over the shop. And it's a real mess. And one of their staff leaves. All of a sudden, they don't know what to order from where. It's a real mess. So I played with Hey You, and at the side, it made a lot of sense. It's the same type of product, right? It's ordering, it's payments, it's mobile, it's showing products. It sounds similar, but like most problems, when you scratch the surface, you start to realize just how much goes on behind the scenes. And through the help of a bunch of really awesome people, we decided that we were going to spin this out into a completely separate business called Ordermentum. And we were going to focus our energy on very specifically solving the pain points of both food service suppliers like coffee roasters and bakers and distributors, and the venue. And I've always been really passionate about these win-wins. Like, what can I work on that creates a win for both the buyer and seller in this case? In Hey You, it was both the venue and the consumer wanting to buy their goods. Win-wins are super hard. Two-sided marketplaces are super hard, but they are the things that really excite me. How can I solve two big customer segment problems in one solution? I actually pitched the idea to my co-founder of Ordermentum, Andrew Lowe. He was running Toby's estate at the time, and he's just a juggernaut of the industry. He did such an amazing job with that brand. He's a great person. And I pitched it to him hoping to get him as a customer, and I actually luckily got him as a co-founder. So he came into the business with me, and together he brought the deep industry expertise on the supply side, and I brought the product and technology, and together it's been a whole lot of fun.
You've raised money through that business and also through your previous business too, and you're very experienced in doing that. We'll touch on that in just a minute, but just catch us up on how you've then built what it is that you have today.
Yeah, sure. So look, it started as a really small idea. And I think when people ask me, how do I get started? It's always about finding the smallest thing you can build to actually prove that you're adding the value that you hope to. And so what we did then was we raised some what we call seed money through family and friends. We managed to get Anthony and Dave Manassan on board as seed investors. Now, they're from the Manassan family that knows the industry inside out. And they were great advisors and investors through the early days. And through working with them, we got to build what's called the MVP, the minimum viable product. The first version of what Ordermentum is today was built with the help of them. And at that time, an external dev team headed up by Rob Morris. And that was super important because that's where you make all your mistakes. That's where you learn just how wildly wrong your initial expectations were. Lucky enough to have raised money in Hey You several times. And I think we've raised over $25 million between the two businesses over the years now. So I was lucky enough to have the expertise of knowing where to go for capital and how to present that. But that was a super important early phase of the business. And then throughout, we've managed to get on board some fantastic investors to support us as we hit those key scale points. And to give you a lens today, I mean, Ordermentum, from when it was founded in those early days, we went through a phase of trying to get our first 10 suppliers on board. Fast forward today, we now have over 550 suppliers on the network. We work with over 30,000 hospitality venues. We're super proud of being able to facilitate these experiences between food service suppliers and that many hospitality venues in the country, especially at a time when they need it most.
Fantastic. So what is it that you're learning about now and you're pushing forward with? What is it that you're doing to innovate in an industry where there's a lot of innovation in tech, but often not a lot in hospitality retail generally? I mean, I cover a lot of segments where there is. Listeners will be very familiar with the fact that we've got tech founders of hospitality affiliated businesses on the show all the time, but hospitality itself doesn't necessarily have a lot of innovation generally. It really jumps in innovation. They try different food products and ingredients in drinks and whatnot. But tell us about how you've merged the two over that time and your love of the industry and your background in tech, and then what you're doing to innovate now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, back in the early days of Hey You, I mean, it was really hard to sell tech in this industry. If you go back to 2011 or 12, we're talking about an industry who was running on some POS systems, but largely it was we're talking cash tills, and it was a very different industry. And there was a couple of things that really enabled what we were doing, and we were pretty lucky to be operating when we were. So for instance, at that time, iPads or tablets, in fact, had just been launched. And so what that provided was an opportunity to get technology right at the point of sale in a hospitality venue, be it a cafe or a restaurant. That became a whole lot cheaper and easier, which was one big enabling factor. The second thing was just mobile phone take up. I think early days, we were at 70% smartphone adoption in urban cities. That was a really big enabler as well. But you know what, James, the thing that actually made the biggest difference, they were really important, but the thing that made the biggest difference was what I saw there was a growing impatience in society, which was a huge theme that applied to every part of life. It was really weird. It really stuck out to me. And it would be little things like people waiting for their coffee would go looking at their watch and rudely looking at the barista over the machine. And it really stuck out to me that there was something there that was unpleasant for the operator, but also inconvenient for the consumer. And so that was the problem we were tapping into at that point. And it's interesting, you raised the point around the hesitancy of adopting change. It was huge at the start, right? Like there was enormous hesitancy. But through all manner of changes in hospitality over the years, I think change is rapid now. We've gone from digital payments being a huge thing. We've gone from POS systems to being almost ubiquitously digital now. We've gone from their accounting systems being completely digital through the likes of Xero and Mile really changing the market. And I think that and competition has led to growing change in the venue as well. People are now looking at different ways to create amazing experience for their customers through produce, through technology, but through new customer experience, new formats opening up. So whilst I don't disagree with your point around change is hard, I do see that over the last 10 years, there's been a pretty dramatic shift in things even beyond technology.
Big time. And I absolutely agree that change has been occurring more and more. It's just typically an industry that needs a bit of a shake in the retail end anyway, normally. But what is it that you're doing to push things forward or innovate more than, say, your competitors?
The way we look at it is that we're really blessed with, I suppose, the size of the network and how well it's growing. We've got a very different approach. We focus on our customers, and our customers are referring all our growth. And so we've got a growth model that's really rapid and it's working really well. What we've moved to now is, rather than feature selling and rather than all these specific items, what we've really focused on is our higher purpose. And where we've come to on that is that our job is to allow our supplier customers, food service operators, and our venues to get rid of all the mundane stuff they do today. We want to create space for them to do amazing things and to create amazing customer experiences. Often we're behind the scenes. Often we're about chef ordering their fresh produce or a barista ordering their coffee or milk or what have you, and the manager ordering bread and pastry and everything in between. But I think what we've identified is that our job is to create the space so that what they can do is focus more on their customers and the awesome products they sell. Because one of the things, I mean, despite being a bit of a tech geek myself, like one of the things that I really resonate with as a similarity with the hospitality operator is, like them, I'm just fascinated by how I can create awesome product experiences. And I think that's exactly the same for all the best hospo operators. I used to remember when I was selling to venues more and more back in the day, I could always tell instantly the operator who was passionate about customer service. You could see the way they laid out the store, the way they designed the kitchen cabinet, the way all the pastries were lined up, or the way they'd instantly come up to me and say, "Adam, welcome, great to meet you. Can I get you a coffee before we get started?" That friendliness and that focus on the experience from the first time I walk into the store, that's just so inspiring to me. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to allow them to get rid of the transaction and to focus on everything that's important, which is their customer and product.
Thank you for circling around there. So we touched on a few things, not just about what you were innovating on there, but also a little bit about the innovations and innovative techniques that you've seen in the industry, and then circling back to what it is that you're doing with Ordermentum to change things. I mentioned before that we were going to touch on the fact that you are very experienced with raising capital, and that you've raised, you said, just over 25 million across 2 different businesses there. I want to tie that into what you just described in your answer around the customer experience. So how have you used those funds over the years to then drive a development in the customer experience of your businesses?
When you raise money over the years, it's always incremental. So it starts small and it builds up. And I think in the early days, it's a really tough balance to focus on finding product market fit, but also polishing up the experience. And I think in the early phases of business, you're still in that finding product market fit phase where you tend to go quite wide in terms of the features you build and how you're going to make it work for the customer, because you're searching, you're in a discovery phase. As you get bigger and as the product market becomes more obvious, and as you start to move into a scale phase, which is how we consider ourselves now, it gives you much more capacity to invest in the customer experience and the polish. But look, it's always a battle, to be honest. It's always, how do I make the right balance between making an experience beautiful, but also testing different features and so forth? And I'm not sure that I've always got the balance completely right. One thing I know is that the more you focus on the customer and a really great experience that they love, the more it just echoes across the rest of your business. And that's something we tried to hold really true to. How can we make this much more than a 10x better experience than they have today elsewhere? And unless you do that, you're just not going to get the cut through. It's been said before, but we're no longer in the technology economy. It's more a question of, can you get people's attention? And the only way to do that, given huge expectations around apps right now, is to have an awesome customer experience. And that's something we're very focused on.
How have you done that? How have you driven the development in and the quality of that customer experience?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. So firstly, it's hiring great people. So I've been really blessed to work with some amazing product and engineering teams that are really fastidious about the stability, but also the experience from start to finish. And I think that's a cultural thing that you need to embed quite early in the business. And I'm lucky to have a team that's really focused on that. So that's the first thing. But I think the other thing, James, is to really ask the question of the customers, what are the pain points you have today? I think as product people, sometimes we get stuck on what we want to solve, but you need to zoom out. You need to start from a place of what's your pain point. Often it's a really delicate balance between listening and leading. You always listen. You always take on what's being said. Sometimes you implement it verbatim. Sometimes you need to lead out and pivot that feedback into something that you know is going to potentially offer that 10x experience. And so that listen or lead balance, I think, is one of the keys to all success in digitizing the industry. Sometimes you build exactly what's described. Sometimes you build something that's incredibly different. But at all times, it has to be focused on solving the customer's problem and just making their life better.
There's a question I ask often when customer feedback comes up. I'll ask you it today. So how do then you decide what feedback is important and what you should be, I guess, discarding when you do get that sort of feedback from customers? You touched on making that decision around listening and hearing it and then implement. Sometimes you have to implement something slightly different. But how do you know what's important and what's not important to listen to?
Designing your feedback loops is really important. What tends to happen is you have multiple sources of feedback and you start to get signals. You need to interpret whether that's noise or if it's a signal. And so what I would say is by designing your feedback loops through customer surveys, customer interviews, a combination of objective and subjective feedback across a range of customers, new customers, old customers, big customers, small customers, all the different carve-outs you can do to look at the representative customers. By doing that, you tend to pick up on what's common across all of them. And then it comes down to what is your vision for the business and the end game, and how can you marry up this feedback with the end game whilst delivering these fantastic sort of experiences. I don't think there's any silver bullet on this. And to be honest, the biggest challenge anyone faces in building a new technology product is prioritization. I have a small amount of resource. What is the thing I can do to create the best impact? So look, it's a really difficult mismatch of all of these things. How much work's involved? How many times you've heard it? Are there any alternatives you could deliver that would build a really good experience that they'd love? And throwing all those together, and the best thing you can do as a product leader in this world of uncertainty, go back to first principles, look at where you're going to end up and where you know that the future is, and try and align everyone's incentives and requirements and needs to that distant future. That's a real art form, and I think it's at the core of really good product management.
Looking at the industry more broadly, this can be something specific that you're looking at the moment, or more broadly, I might actually offer you the option there. What needs attention that isn't receiving it? And this is, I ask the question very generally to hear your interpretation of it as well. So what do you think needs attention that isn't receiving it?
Look, I think in the short term, there's a pretty obvious one, which is support of our hospitality venues. They're really hurting right now. There's not many sectors that have been more impacted than the current COVID crisis, the lockdowns implemented. There seems to me like there's a little bit of a disconnect there between what's happening on the street and what's being discussed at a political level. I know everyone's doing their best and I know it's super difficult, so I cast no aspersions on that topic. But I do think that there's a real need in the short term, to your question about what needs attention right now, support of our hospo venues. They're the lifeblood of retail. They're the people that create great experiences, provide great joy, and they employ an enormous number of people. And so from my perspective, on a very short-term current COVID context, that's a real standout in terms of something that needs attention. More broadly, though, there's a real opportunity to focus on payments and streamlining payments through industry and through supply chain. We've seen during COVID, if we look at the numbers, the supply shocks that occur, the impact it has from the supplier all the way through the venue, the payment terms blowing out. For those who don't use payments on Ordermentum, we've seen this huge blowout of payment terms. And that not only reduces growth, but in times of crisis, it creates real risk to the business's viability. And unfortunately, we've seen many businesses close over COVID due to not having streamlined processes for payment. On the other side of that, there's this really awesome opportunity. If you streamline the payment process, for instance, through the supply chain, everyone wins. People are clear on what they're spending. They order more to what they need. Everything changes for the better. It's one of those really important steps you make at the start of the funnel that helps everything after it. And so I think digitizing payment through hospitality generally is something that will yield enormous benefit and efficiency throughout the entire sector.
It's certainly happening and catalyzed by COVID. It's been more salient to a lot of operators to making that sort of change, or at least the option to make that change has become more salient and then more prevalent in the industry. And we've had a few guests on the program that have been in a slightly different space to yourself there. So listeners who've heard a few more episodes will hear a bit more about that too, where we delve a bit more deeply into what that actually means if you're listening and not familiar with that sort of process. I want to ask you a different question though, Adam, because just before we get to the end of the episode, I've got my last few sort of questions for you today. But you touched on being competitive in the space where there are a lot of apps that you're trying to get in front of to get the attention of not just consumers, but other businesses and even investors in the same sort of space. Can you tell me more about how you handle competitors? This is a question I do often ask other guests, but I'd like to know how you handle competitors.
How you deal with competitors is super interesting. We're lucky in the sense that there's not a heap of competition in what we do. We've got a very different approach, and that's lucky in the sense that there's a lot of open space where we're playing at the moment. But I think if I go back to my early days at HeyU, I think I was obsessed by competitors. I used to watch their every move. I used to spend a lot of time on what they're doing. And what I found, call it 2 years into that journey, was that by over-obsessing on what our competitors were up to, I was really losing track of my own vision. The way I approach competition is to say, you've always got to be aware of what the market's doing, and you've got to look below the surface. You've got to look at the strategy. You've got to look at what they're doing day to day, and you've got to try and develop this depth of what's going on in their business and pick up on some metrics to give you a sense of what they're up to. But you can't conflate what's going on there with your vision and your strategy. The reality is that you need to hold firm to your vision. You started this for a reason. You've been making changes to that vision based on the feedback you get daily. It's this really important balance of being aware, but also continually testing your vision and how you go to market, but being confident in what you're doing, because nothing is certain in this world, but you can use the best information available for you and then stay confident with it. Another analogy I sometimes use is that a strong, fast decision is often better than an overly thought through, overly strategic decision. And I think that also plays a part in this role as well.
It's an interesting answer. And just to bring it to the forefront, what I am thinking about there, I mean, you're an entrepreneur in the early stage of business compared to someone who's running a company that's, say, running APAC for, a huge conglomerate, right? So it's interesting hearing your view on that. And I've brought it up on the show before, this ready, fire, aim, like the firing from the hip sort of decision can be very, very good in those early stages. And I'm careful with some businesses that have been acquired going through the process of discussing those sorts of things there. Have you seen your perspective change at all with the philosophy that you have for making decisions as your businesses have grown?
Yeah, definitely. It's a really good point. And people sometimes look at startups as innovative and fast decision making and, more nimble and all those sort of things. And in a business that would be now described as a scale up with a lot more customers and a lot more users, I can just see the thought that it takes now to implement change is much more significant. And so I think it's wrong to say that you can hold on to the complete flexibility that you get to enjoy at the start. And so what we do is we kind of separate this business as usual items into new items. We talk about cross-functional teams that work on new innovative items. We try to keep that super entrepreneurial, super innovative, super nimble spirit on things that we're testing, because in those early phases, you've really got to rapidly test and fail in order to get on the right path. And then the BAU, whilst we still innovate and we still externally reference and we still look at ways to improve what we're doing, the innovation is of a different type. And you build this more firm footing every step you take into the journey of a new product, business, or feature. And that's kind of the way we think about it. When you look at big businesses and how they compete in this space, I've been told 1,000 times that big brand X is going to knock me over, or is going to compete with me, or is going to take all my customers. And the truth is that this saying pops to my mind, which is things are never as good or as bad as they seem. I'll give you a funny example of this, right? When I was first rolling out Hey You, I remember I had 3 or 4 pilot customers that I was looking to go into. I was really close to getting my first build into those venues. And I remember meeting with a really well-known cafe in Sydney through a really good friend. It was a great intro. And I thought, you know what, if I could get these guys, these are the best in the market. And I remember meeting with him, and I remember the guy saying, oh, no, I've just built an app. You just swipe left, right. You get rid of your orders. I don't need your app. I'm already doing my own. And I remember being petrified that every venue that I speak to from that moment on is going to just build their own app. Now, the truth is that as easy as he thought it was, as well resourced as he was, because he was a very well-known cafe with a whole lot of money behind him, the truth is that that solution was not fit for market. And it was not fit for market because me as a user, I don't want to go and have an app every different venue I buy from. And the same is true of a hospitality venue. I don't want to get an app for every single supplier I have. I suppose my point is that things are never as good or as bad as they seem. You've got to do the work. Innovation is hard, and it happens at the ground roots. It happens on the street. It happens in talking to customers, getting it wrong and improving. And that traditionally has been something that bigger companies, large corporates with big brands and huge resources, they've found it difficult to keep that sort of nimbleness on the street. And so, yeah, to the extent that anyone's concerned about competition, it's always something you watch for, but just treat it as one input in your vision and something to stay across, but something not to be afraid of.
And you do often see that mentality shift across the company over a longer period post-acquisition. So it's something that I find it interesting to watch that as things change. Sometimes they do hang on to the philosophies of the early days for a bit longer, but I appreciate hearing your thoughts and experiences on that one, Adam. I'd love to ask you, just as we get to the latter end of the episode, just a little bit maybe around the models and systems and processes that you see in other businesses, maybe in adjacent industries that aren't competitors, with things that you're looking to use to take and build your businesses.
From my perspective, we're always looking at ways to improve how we operate. And there's some very well-trodden paths here around Scrum and Agile would be terms that have floated up a lot, I'm sure, for you in this topic. These are great ways of thinking, ways of operating that help maintain your agility whilst ensuring progress. And this is certainly something that we focus a lot on in our business. I externally reference a lot. I read a book every other week. I say read a book. To be honest, I listen to books. I listen to a lot of podcasts. My wife always calls me up on that one. But I listen to a lot of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts like yours. And from my perspective, that's where I get all these different ideas on how we can change the way we think, how we can change our strategy, how we can change our approach. What are the industries that are a bit ahead of us in terms of this transition of digitizing themselves? In our team, we've got a Slack channel called Pod Club. I'm sure it's not uncommon out there, but we're constantly sharing inspiration from outside the business to ensure we're not just walking down the same path without testing it. And so the other thing I believe is that there's no perfect answer to any problem, right? There's a bunch of different answers and you take what you need from each of them to be successful. So from my perspective, it's about externally referencing. In fact, when we interview, it's one of the things we focus on a lot. How externally referenced is this person? What do they listen to? Where do they get their ideas from? How do they test their own ideas? Are 3 of the key questions we try and understand. Because I think when we bring new people into business, it's not actually to do things the way we do it. It's actually to test the way we do it. A new employee's way of thinking is actually so important because what they do is they come in and they bring their experience, and that's often more close to a customer. So I suppose my answer is we externally reference a lot. We keep looking at systems, ideas, and businesses that are similar, and we take whatever we can and test it carefully in our environment to make sure it works and improves our thinking and improves our delivery on the vision.
Thanks for sharing that, Adam. Just the last couple of questions for you today. I want to ask you, and the question itself doesn't really do it justice, so I usually elaborate on it a little bit. Ask what your biggest challenge is right now. That's really looking for friction that you're experiencing, some obstacles that you're overcoming at the moment. This could be personally or professionally. What is it that you're occupying your time and attention on solving currently?
One of the big things on my mind is recruiting, onboarding, and connecting with staff in a remote work environment. I know remote's not completely new and we've been doing it for a while, but I'm just cognizant of the challenges, the different challenges that it presents. I find that it's harder to pick up when a team member's struggling, in the current environment. There's homeschooling. There's so many different challenges that affect people. And I like to think that I'm quite focused on the team's welfare, but I find it harder to pick up on when someone's struggling today than I did when we're in the office. And work from home's here to stay. I don't think there's any doubt that work has changed as we know it going forward. But I think that one of the challenges for me is how do we ensure the welfare, the quality of the employee experience in this new world? Luckily, our head of people, Tanya's awesome and she's working on great things here. But how do you get past the gift hamper, which we've all done and we should continue to do? But how do you get past that and really pick up on what your employees need at the right time for them to be the best person they can? And I think that's a big challenge for everyone in business right now in a work from home environment. The second one I would say is just recruiting. We're recruiting 10 roles at the moment and it's a really competitive environment in our world. And so finding the best talent, onboarding the best talent. I just had a new head of product, Tafiq, who's awesome, join the business. And in onboarding him, he was transitioning from back to Australia from Dubai. And he was in hotel quarantine for the first 2 weeks of his onboarding. And just the pressures that puts on him and how I can support him in that environment is completely different to what it was previously. People is a big topic right now across all industries, specifically service industries where remote work is a possibility. The other point I'd say is just scale. Like we're in a scale phase. We've got big ambitions and we're blessed with a big set of momentum right now. But I'm constantly thinking about how we can get out of the way of ourselves. There's all these little moments. Anyone who scales the business can see these moments where the customer loses, you lose. How do you identify them and resolve those moments as quickly as possible? It's not unique to our business. It's common across all scale-ups, but it's something that I wouldn't say keeps me awake at night. I think we're having great success on the topic, but I enjoy that problem and it's something I think about a lot.
And it's common to hear, as you said there, from businesses that are in tech or scaling quickly, that's a challenge that they face is to scale quickly but sustainably. And that is something that I do elaborate on with some other guests on the program. But for the sake of time, I'd just like to ask you on the first two there out of the three around recruitment and staying connected with your staff and the people that you're dealing with. How are you dealing with that? How are you overcoming that obstacle?
There's a bunch of techniques we employ to try and maintain connection and to stay across the employee needs and how we help them. They range from weekly and daily stand-ups. They range from, we've sent out a hamper recently, I think 2 hampers actually, as a bit of a surprise and delight exercise. We're doing active walks. So we're pairing up the business using some technology and some Slack plugins to pair up different people in the business to go on a walking meeting, obviously separate, but to call each other and to just get to know other people in the business. And we're doing a full day off per department over the next little while. What we found is that team members are reluctant, understandably reluctant to take holidays. And so how can you support them to have the break they need whilst not forcing them to use up their holiday leave in a world where they can't go anywhere? So that's something that's been a bit of a challenge that we're focused on. I think it's just a general empathy and understanding that we talk about a lot in the business. It's about our conversations, about being understanding of the pressures our customers are under, understand the pressure our colleagues are under, being more flexible in the workplace, and through that flexibility, communicating better and better. A lot of those things are, I don't want to call them gimmicks because I think they're nice things that you should do that help. But I think at the core of it, it's about communication and empathy and making that a part of your everyday conversation. Everyone's got something going on at the moment they didn't have previously. And how can we consider that in how we approach and work with that person to ensure not only we're both better, but our customers are better for that approach. That's how we've been thinking about it.
Thanks, Adam. Last question I have for you on the program today, and thank you for joining me. This one is, who would you like to hear on the show?
Look, there's 2 people I've got on my mind on this topic. And the first is Sam Scamboloni. He works for Purpose Co., the innovation arm of Oz Harvest. And Sam is a real industry veteran. Anyone who loves coffee will know about Sam. He's a bit of a coffee doyen. I think he's got a really strong lens of the industry from multiple perspectives. And he's one of the best operators I've ever worked with. So he's fantastic. And the second answer is Nick Clowett. Nick founded Counter, which you might know he sold last year. Nick's a real jet. He was well ahead of the curve on the topic of cloud-based POS. He was a real visionary. And I remember at the time people saying, no chance, it's not going to happen. There's no way this will work. And his leadership and commitment and drive on that topic, I think, was really inspirational. And you know what? He was right. A lot of what he was advocating for well before anyone else has played out to be the exact future of this industry. So yeah, I think he's a fantastic guy and well ahead of the curve.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for putting those names forward and joining me on the program. It's been a pleasure having you on, hearing about your experiences in business with Hey You and Ordermentum. And I'm really excited to hear how you roll out your growth further and scale sustainably, Adam.
James, thanks for your time. Love the podcast. I've really enjoyed being here.
This program is hosted by James Henderson. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.